John Deere's popular 50 series was introduced in 1986 to replace the company's well-liked 40 series models. Customers could choose from a wide range of horsepower from 38 to 114, and then on the later series 3650 it went up to 118 horsepower, meaning that a new range offered something suitable for virtually every operation. Built in Europe and Mannheim, the new tractors were heavily based on outgoing models but with subtle improvements. In this guide, I will concentrate on the most popular tractors as far as the Irish and UK markets are concerned and aim to explain why these machines remain as desirable now as they were in the 80s and 90s. So, hello everybody, and you're very welcome back to the channel. Um, so today we're talking about my favorite subject again. Yes, the green and gold of John Deere. So, we're dealing with the 50 series today, and we're dealing in specifically with the 50 series that were European built. So that is the tractors like the 1550 and up to the 1950, 2650, 2850, 3050, 3350, and 3650. The American 50 series are for a different video. These tractors were hugely popular. They were based very, very similar on the 40 series, but had some of the problems ironed out of the 40 series, and there were some new introductions on the 50 series. They were an upgrade. They were a step up from the 40 series. That was a very, very popular series of tractors as well. So you're welcome back to the channel, and everyone that tuned in last week to our video on the Big Bud. Thanks to everyone. Thanks for all the comments. Interesting video. We're taking it down a notch this week, a little bit smaller. Still an American company, but European built tractors. Ones in particular that I grew up, the 50 series, as I have spoken about before on different videos, is tractors that I grew up learning how to drive on 50 series, 40 series and 50 series. And from a very young age, I was involved with, repairs to them, mechanical repairs in Mead Farm Machinery. So when I was young, as a teenager, I would have been in the workshop helping the mechanics from about the age of 12 onwards. I could be put up cleaning down a cylinder head or lapping in valves or helping split a tractor and doing clutches and that on a Saturday morning on my own. When I was 16, probably 15 or 16, I started doing clutches and that on my own. And it was a great way to learn. And I loved the 50 series, and I love the simplicity of them. You are buying them, because you do have to remember now that the 50 series was introduced in 86. So that's 38 years ago. They're not a young tractor by any means now. They are gone beyond nearly even the modern classic at this stage. They are getting near the classic tractors category. So we look at the engines first. So the constant power engines, as they're called, was the backbone of John Deere's design and the commonality of parts, with all these models sharing the same bore and stroke dimensions of 106.5 millimeters and 110 millimeters, respectively, on 6 cylinders. This 1 litre per cylinder displacement, the company said, enabled John Deere constant power engines to develop equal power without strain, compared to competitive engines with smaller displacements. Rated speed was either 2,300 RPM or 2,400 RPM, which Deere said was just one of the number of features that gave the 50 series engines a telling measure of reliability and life expectancy. So when we look at the models then, the ones that we are most familiar with, so let's say the 2650 and 2850, so it would have been equipped with what was called the 4239TL engine, so a 4-cylinder, 239 cubic inch, 3.9 litre turbocharged engine. The 30 and the 3350 then would have had the 359 engine, so 6-cylinder, 359 cubic inch displacement out of a 5.9 litre engine, and that was the DL008 engine. And then the 3650, the biggest of them all, the range topping 3650, it had the 6-cylinder as well. 6-cylinder, 359 cubic inch engine, TL007, and that was turbocharged. So 3650, 114 horsepower, 3050 and 3350 were 90 and 100 horsepower respectively, 92 I think and 100 horsepower respectively. The 26 and 2850, then the 2650 was 78 horsepower, 78, and the 2850 was in around 84, 85 horsepower, something around that. So a good broad range of horsepowers across the range. The 3050 probably was the one that was kind of lost in the middle, in the fact that it was a big tractor. It was the same size pretty much as 3650. in as regards dimensions, but it was only 90 horsepower, so it was a little bit underpowered for the size of the tractor, whereas the 2850 was a smaller, more compact tractor with almost as much horsepower and very, very torquey little tractor, and they were extremely popular. So the 26 and 2850 were hugely popular tractors. 3050 and 3350s were the same. 3650 was a very popular tractor as well, but a big tractor in its day. A piston speed of 8.4 meters per second fared well against industry norms of between 9 meters per second and 11 meters per second, equating to reduced vibration, quieter operations, and long service life, as well as far better fuel economy. The engines featured a wet sleeve cylinder liners, which were easy to replace and dissipated heat into the surrounding cooling efficiency, improving engine life. Another interesting feature is piston spray cooling. So basically, what it done was it had took filtered oil and it sprayed filtered oil up onto the underside of each piston in the form of a jet, which cools the cylinder and keeps the pistons and liners well lubricated. The constant power engine featured a low friction piston design for reduced drag on the cylinder walls, which means that greater fuel efficiency, fuel economy, and less wear. What's more, the high ring position reduces the so-called dead area around the top of the piston for tighter compression, better combustion, and easier starting in cold conditions. The 1950 higher spec four-cylinder tractors and all the three six-cylinder models featured a viscous fan, and whether they have 3, 4, or 6 cylinders and are naturally aspirated or turbocharged, these engines are famed for their reliability. The porous liners that affected the reliability in the early days of the 40 series aren't so much a problem associated with the 50 series, and so you can expect the hour meter to be in the region of 5 figures or more before major work is required. And yes, these tractors, if they were looked after, if the right oil, they were serviced properly, and they weren't abused, they would easily get to 10,000 hours without much work. Sorry, now that's just my dog having a drink of water there. If you can hear him in the background, slurping away. But yeah, they were superbly reliable. Now, the 3050 and the 3350s, what a lot of people don't with them was because they were a little bit underpowered, people put aftermarket turbochargers on them, so TB turbos, and they upped the horsepower a little bit, which obviously, depending on who was doing the job and how the fuel pump and that was set up, probably did cause a little bit of issues down the line. There are plenty of them out there still with turbos on them that didn't come with turbos. They basically turned them into a 3650 engine because there was very, very little differences. There was some differences with the injectors and bearing shells and things like that, but it did make a great tractor out of a 3050, and the sound out of them, you could easily get them up to 125 horsepower. It made a superb tractor out of the 3050 and 3350s. A dry disc clutch was standard across the board with hydraulic actuation on the larger SG2 cab models. With the right operator and good working conditions, you can expect to get at least 7 to 8,000 hours out of the clutch before it needs overhauling, which can be an expensive process, although it is a very straightforward process on a 50 series tractor, which once you have the right tools, you don't have to take the cab off, basically split it at the cab, take off steering pipes, take off whatever wiring and cables are going on to the engine, a good rail underneath you. If it's a four-wheel drive, take the shaft off, ring of bolts, and split it apart, and you would have one apart in an hour and a half easily enough. Depending on then, some of them had an extra fuel tank. You might have to take the fuel tank off on the side, and some of them, if you had a loader and the loader brackets come down across the side, obviously that made for a little bit more work on them, but in general they were a very, very easy tractor to work on. So then available throughout the range, with the exception of the range topping 3650, were 3 transmission options. The tried and tested power synchron transmission was carried over from the 40 series and offers 16 forward and 8 reverse gears. A H pattern shift features gears 1 to 4, while a second lever allows selection of high and low and reverse ranges. The shuttle shift integrated reverse opposite low range, coupled with 50% faster reverse speeds, shortens cycle time. On-the-go shifting from either a dash-mounted lever on the right-hand console, depending on the model and cab fitted, enables most suitable speed for the job to be achieved. And the high-low shift was one of the changes that they brought over from the 40 series. So anyone that has driven a 40 series with an SG2 cab will know that going from high to low, you basically take the 1 to 4 lever and you knock it either left or right. Whereas on the 50 series, it had a separate lever at the base of the throttle lever for going high to low. Um, and it was an easier operation, and it did actually lead to less transmission issues, because one of the problems that the transmission problems that there was with a lot of the 40 series and 50 series was wear on the forks in the transmission. So the selector forks in the transmission, wear and breakages on the shaft going from the casing into the transmission. And what was happening with a lot of them was, because the gear levers are positioned in such an ergonomic position for the driver, they used to leave their hand resting on it when they'd be driving, because seemed like a comfortable place to just leave their hand resting on the gear lever. And what that done basically was kept strain on the linkages going down into the gearbox and on the fork, and it would be a slight rub in it. So anyone that was driving a 40 series in particular, if you were changed from high to low regularly, they would just leave their hand on the 1 to 4 lever and basically leave it there, and that was an issue. You're not supposed to drive with your hand resting on the gear lever, because it will cause strain down in the transmission train. So yeah, for those that didn't plump for the optional power synchronous transmission, there was a choice of the standard 8x4 synchron or the 12x8 synchron plus creeper. It's also worth noting that the 3650 was only available with the power synchron transmission. So yet, although the transmission, it is a strong point, and although it's not indestructible, problems are few and far between. Issues usually occur, as I said, from wear in the selectors, which can be easily replaced, but it's worth listening out for strange noises. The bearings on the lower range shaft can fail and cause problems, but it is not particularly common. If top speed is an important factor in your purchase, it's worth seeking out a 40-kilometer version. Later built 50 series models equipped with four-wheel drive had the option of a 40-kilometer transmission, including, contrary to popular belief, all of the three-cylinder tractors. All but the 1350, the 1550, and 3650 models were available to purchase in two or four-wheel drive configuration, as the smallest models were two-wheel drive, and obviously the 3650 only came in four-wheel drive. So the 40-kilometer gearbox came out on the 3650 model later in the series, probably around 1992. So the last of the 3650s came with 40 kilometers an hour, and they are highly sought after tractors. So they would have came with maybe the wide step model with 40 kilometer 3650s all had high lift. The 2850s and 2650s, I think around 87, 88, came out with 40 kilometer an hour transmission. The first of them came equipped with actually a brake caliper on the front PTO shaft. I'm not sure whether I spoke about this before. They came with a brake caliper on the front PTO shaft, which was a problem if you were baling with it or doing straw work or something like that. You did have to be very careful that you didn't get straw wrapped around the front disc that was built into the front prop shaft and tear off down the road at 40 kilometers an hour, because you would very quickly see smoke coming from underneath the front axle of the tractor. Now, I do have experience of this. Luckily, there was no harm done, but it did happen. So it is something that if you do have 2850 or 2650 with a brake caliper fitted on your front PTO shaft, and you are inclined to go out into a straw field, just make sure that the guard is there, everything is in place, because they can go on fire, especially if you've got a little bit of an oil leak or something going on around it. It can be a huge issue. But yeah, now I was lucky enough, as I said, to work on these tractors when I was very young, from a very young age in Meat Farm Machinery, and I was very lucky to work with some excellent mechanics like Jerry Sheridan and Pierce Murphy and Tom Dunn, who have probably between the three of them probably over 100 years experience in John Deere at this stage. So I was very lucky, and anyone that follows the YouTube video of another very famous farm in County Meath that are restoring, in the process over the last couple of years of restoring two 3650 models from County Meath. I would have remembered those two tractors when they were brand new. I would have driven the two of those tractors when they were brand new off the trucks when they came in from the UK. I do remember the two tractors, the two particular tractors, and I would have driven them when they were brand new off the truck. And it was when you were 16 years of age. That was a huge privilege to be able to do something like that, get into a brand new one and drive it. I was very, very lucky. Um, so yeah, so moving on from that, then when you look at the front of the tractor, what they were really, really famous for um, was their maneuverability. So they had this front wheel lean. So there was little to go wrong with the front axle on them on the two-wheel drive models, but look for the usual pivot pin and kingpin wear, particularly if the tractor, which a lot of the two-wheel drives were fitted with loaders because they were generally a stockman's tractor and they were used for moving bales and silage and stuff like that. So the four-wheel drive Deeres of this era are famed for their John Deere invented 12-degree caster angle, which allows for the front wheels to lean when turning with the pivot axis of a steering knuckle tilted 12 degrees to the rear, purportedly more than twice that of the nearest competitor. A 50-degree steering angle could be achieved even with large tyres at standard tread settings. And if you did look at one of these, you would, on full lock, you would think that maybe there was something loose or something wrong with them if you weren't familiar with looking at them because the way that the front wheel leaned over. But it made for a superbly maneuverable tractor. Um, the lock in them was better than anything out there on the market at the time, and it was a huge selling point for them, especially if you're in and around a tight yard or if you're doing a lot of tillage work and work on headlands and stuff like that, a lot of turning. It was a fantastic addition to them. So the axle can be engaged on the move under load thanks to an oil-cooled multi-disc clutch. That's the four-wheel drive clutch by way of a dash-mounted rocker switch. A self-locking differential is also a feature of the driven front axle, locking automatically at the first signs of slip. Although introduced well into the 1980s, when power steering systems were the norm, be sure to check that the tractor you're intending to purchase has such a luxury, as the smallest models didn't have power steering as standard, particularly if they were destined for market where basic tractors were desirable. And if you are looking at one that has power steering, obviously most of them did, nearly all of them that I've ever seen had power steering on them. The steering orbital unit is something to pay particular attention to because they were prone to leaking and the valves inside in them were prone to sticking. But so what you will find is if you start the tractor or if you leave the steering, take your hands off the steering when it's idling, it will gradually drift either to the left or to the right. And then again, check for leaks. They were prone to leaking as well. A couple of things to look out for. So Deere's braking system design shouldn't cause any problems, but look out for insufficient stopping power on high-hour tractors. The inboard disc brakes incorporate a cling-resistant surface and retraction springs to aid disc separation following braking and are fed by cooled filtered oil to add to heat dissipation. So taking a look at the hydraulics and PTO. So John Deere marketed its hitch system as Liquid Lightning, employing a closed center hydraulic system throughout the range. That was in partnership with Lower Link Sensing. So the crux of the idea is a special hydraulic pump costing somewhere in the region of €600 plus VAT that rests when there's no demand on hydraulic function. So this is a Danfoss made pump that sits at the front of the engine, sort of underneath the fuel tank. Pressure inside the pump builds and forces the pistons away from a cam drive so that there's no overheating or parasitic power wastage. Meanwhile, oil in the hydraulic line is held at a standby pressure. Once hydraulic power is called for, the pressure inside the pump is relieved and the spring force and pistons on the cam to drive so that it can deliver the flow of oil required, which is shared by the transmission, simplifying maintenance and reducing expenditure. Pump output across the range was in the region of 45 litres per minute with pressure at 190 bar. So problems that it had basically. And this is probably the biggest downfall of the 50 series that anyone that knows them or is involved in them will know that there is, they do give hydraulic problems. And it is a thing that I've spoken about before. So the unique John Deere closed center hydraulic system can be an issue. And, when you think of this, it's mainly due to the age of the tractor these days, although earlier ones did give trouble with it as well, depending on what they were driven when they were newer. So the output of the internal mounted transmission pump that feeds the front mounted high pressure pump, as well as the high low and PTO clutches, reduces over time, causing a range of hydraulic problems. So you have what's called the transmission pump, and that's inside, basically underneath the cab where you're sitting, and it's housed. And it's prone to to issues from leakage. So there's two steel pipes that come up off it, one in, one out, and they basically fracture, they'll crack, and you'll have a loss of pressure there. There's O-rings that will leak in them. And then, of course, the fact that you're sharing the oil with the braking system in the back end as well, debris and stuff can be picked up, clogging maybe the suction valve or the suction screen or something like that, and that can cause issues. So if the brakes went on a 50 series, you knew you were going to have problems because the crap basically went everywhere. And the first thing you'd notice would be your steering would start to get heavy. Um, your hydraulic function would normally be okay. Uh, you might get a flashing light on the dash. Your high-low might not stay engaged or might stay off. But yeah, they did give troubles like that. But if you knew the system, if you knew how it operated, uh, it was very easily diagnosed and very easily fixed to someone that was familiar with them. So yeah, as I said, the 50 series tractors, so they use a common oil supply for the transmission and hydraulics, and therefore worn out brake discs can contaminate the system, causing premature pump wear. It is quite a labour intensive job to remove the internal hydraulics, as the cab needs to be removed and the tractor splitting. New and genuine replacement parts are available. Now, when I say, it's labour intensive, in this day and age, compared to doing something on a modern tractor, um, replacing something in the hydraulics, it's not, to me, it's not labor intensive. You could have the cab off in an hour and a half. You could have the cab split, the tractor split then in another hour. You could be in at the hydraulics easily before your tea break at 11 o'clock in the morning. Um, they weren't that difficult to work on if you were familiar with them, um, and you had all the tools at hand. You'd fly through it really. Um, so the lower link sensing element of the system is great for uniform tillage, with the system providing sharp response and subsequent signals to the rock shaft. But look out for weeping from the shaft, leaking at the lower link attachment points on the high hour tractors, or those that have been at tillage or around a lot of draft work like ploughing and stuff like that. So over time, the shaft will get grooves and it'll get worn into it, and this combined with age hardened seals leads to oil leakage. Thankfully, this is relatively a straightforward fix, and the parts needed to rectify the problem, the replacement shaft and seals, can be obtained easily for about €150 plus VAT. A Pro-Hytronic electronic linkage control was offered on later six-cylinder tractors, but it's very rare to find a tractor fitted with this system, and many deemed it far too complicated for a basic tractor. There are a few of them out there. I've seen a few of them. A friend of mine has one of them with the Pro-Hydraulic system, but it was only the very, very last of the 3650s and that did find it in. So a high lift linkage became available as an option on the larger 4 and 6 cylinder models, offering an increased range of movement from the lower links and increased lift capacity. Tractors equipped with high lift, which was often abbreviated to HL in classified advertisements, are worth seeking out, not to be confused with high-low. Some people might see HL and think high-low, but it is actually high lift in most ads. All 3650s were fitted with high lift, and the 3050 and 3350 high lift models had a different front axle, engine cylinder block, and transmission castings compared with the standard lift models. The front bolster was also deeper as well. So if you're looking at one from the front in an advertisement or something, it's very easy to tell the difference because where the weight block bolts on, the base weight bolts on, there is a deeper base weight or deeper block at the bolster on the high lift models, because it is a stronger front end on them. So a front linkage and PTO was also available for 4 and 6 cylinder tractors, with a frame running alongside the engine to strengthen the chassis. The front PTO was a further option and transmits power from the crankshaft through an oil-cooled clutch to a reduction gearbox between the lift cylinders. It is actuated by a cab-mounted switch, but can be disengaged completely by a lever on the front gearbox. So that's the gearbox on the front of the PTO gearbox. Front PTO gearbox. The pickup hitches, they're now often worn. So if you buy a second-hand one, they're the one thing to look at, especially if it has an axle hitch. So that was the hitch that would have came on them. So the range of parts to repair the factory fitted axle hitch is now very limited. Good used hitches and parts are almost impossible to find. The best solution is to fit a new aftermarket pickup hitch. And most of the ones that were sold, a lot of them that were sold out of Meat Farm Machinery at the time, they would have been fitted with a Dramone hitch. So Dramone, obviously one of the biggest hitch manufacturers for tractors and plant equipment in the world, um, are manufactured in Oldcastle in County Meath. So when they were developing their telescopic hitches in the 80s, um, a lot of the hitches would have been sent up to be retrofitted onto 50 series John Deere tractors. And I know my uncle's 2850 had one fitted to it, and it was probably the first tractor in the world that had a Dramone telescopic hitch fitted to it. Um, and it was a revolution in terms of the hitches on the 50 series, because nobody ever liked the axle hitch. It had a stupid lever and cable that used to give awful trouble. The latches were too light on them, whereas Dramone was complete revolutionised the hitches on them. They were much beefier, much stronger, um, and you know it had one by it had a handle out the back, so you reached out the back window and you pressed down on a lever to release the latches on the hitch. But they were a superb, uh, you know, upgrade, I suppose, to the pickup hitch on the 50 series. An oil-cooled multi-disc PTO clutch, independently and hydraulically actuated, was a feature across the range, but the speeds offered and method of switching between 540 and 1000 RPM speeds where applicable differed according to the models and cab fitted. There's no major problems associated with the PTO system, but look out for a PTO shaft that doesn't stop turning. This is often due to failure of the friction plates within the PTO clutch pack, either the friction material or the splines that lock to the shaft itself. So the PTO brake, if you see one and the PTO is, it's failing to stop, that's an indication that there is a problem with the PTO clutch pack. So at this point, I would like to say, if you're enjoying the content, please feel free to give us a like, give us a subscription if you haven't already. And if you have a John Deere 40 series or 50 series, if you remember them from your past, if you still have one, if you've restored one, if you've driven one, if you've worked for John Deere throughout the 80s and the 90s when the 50 series were all over the place, please drop a note into the comments whether you like them or dislike them. Personally, they're my favorite tractor. If you're a Ford man, the 10 series, the 7810 and the 6810, what they were to Ford fans, the 50 series is to John Deere fans, and what the 390 and the 390T was to Massey fans, the 50 series was to John Deere fans. So that's where we're talking about. If you are a John Deere fan, that's where they lie. So for all you 50 series fans out there, my next restoration project will be a 50 series tractor. I'm not going to say which one. I'm going to keep it on the wraps for a little while, but it probably won't be for about a year. What I am going to do is it will be a start from scratch, basically. So the hydraulic pump will be coming out and be stripped down and explaining how it operates, how it works, and how to service it. PTO clutch pack, four-wheel drive clutch pack, replacing the clutch, transmission pump, and issues in and around the transmission pump and the high-low pack on them as well, because the high-low pack is an issue on them as well. So if you would get into one maybe and you put it into high-low and all of a sudden the light comes on, the warning light comes on, you've got a leakage inside in your high-low. So the high-low pack seals and stuff like that. So it will be a start to finish John Deere 50 series mechanical restoration. Not so much cosmetic, but mainly mechanical from start to finish. It probably won't be for about another year, hopefully a little bit less, but we're getting there. So looking at the cabs then, so there was a few cab choices, whilst the SG2 cab was probably the most popular. The 50 series, like its predecessor, is famed for the SG2 cab, but this was not available for all models in the range. The smallest 3-cylinder models could only be purchased, depending on the market, with an open station or an MC1 or the CC2 cab. The 2250, 2450, 26 and 2850 had the option of an SG2 cab or an MC1 or a CC2, while the 6-cylinder tractors were only available with the SG2 cab. Now, I should also mention that another cab was also forgotten about is the SG2 low profile cab. So it was basically that SG2 shaped cab, but it was low profile. It had a lower roof, no sunroof, and the gear levers were mid-mounted. They weren't up on the column like the standard SG2 cabs. They were mid-mounted. So in down around your feet. And that was obviously a stockman's tractor as well, I suppose, for getting in on the low sheds and stuff. Yeah, and they were quite popular. Um, some people just like the SG2 for its novel design, single door, and unusual method of entry. The fact remains that it's one of the leaders of its day with noise levels that were below 80 decibels. So look out for later examples with the wider step and handrail assembly, which made for fast improvements. So the 50 series, 3650 and 3350. 3050 didn't have it, neither did the 2650. So the 33 and 3650 had a wide step option. Um, they made it a little bit easier to get into. Look, I had never had any issues getting in and out of them. But then I was younger, I was a little bit more nimble, I suppose, and agile. I still don't have an issue getting into them. I can see how some people that might be of a larger frame might have an issue squeezing in and out past the steering wheel and stuff. But when you got used to it, it became quite normal. And I know if anyone watches Jerry 6420, his two John Deere 2850s and 2650s, or sorry, 3650s, his restorations on them, superb tractors, beautiful, and he's done a fantastic job on them. He's a big man and he loves driving them, so that's good enough for me. So the controls, the switch gear, and analog instruments, they're pretty robust, but electrical gremlins have been known to occur with faults emanating from the fuse box. Due to the tractor's age, the right-hand side of the dashboard can have electrical problems. The terminals on the fuse card and printed circuit get corroded and cause electrical connection issues. New genuine parts are available though, and it's not just older ones, 30-year-old ones that give this trouble. I do remember them giving trouble when they were a couple of years old, especially if you had one maybe got a bit of moisture into it, someone that left the sunroof open or a little bit of water or was messy on the dash and they got dampness and moisture into them. The fuse cards were a huge issue on them. And if you had one that the four-wheel drive wouldn't come on or the lights wouldn't come on, the first place to look would be the fuse card. And generally, that is where the problems lay with them. But it was very, very easily accessible. Pulled up a cover on the right hand side of the dash, and you just slip the card out with all the fuses mounted to it, and you'd normally find corrosion or a break in the contacts in the card. So there's little to go wrong in terms of the gear levers, hydraulics, and PTO controls. It's all very hands-on, but as time goes on, the interior trim of the SG2 can start to look a little bit unloved. Now that's probably because there is a lot of cladding in them. They were a very quiet cab for their day. There was a lot of cladding in the roof, all the pillars, and up the sides of the mud guards. A lot of cladding in them for the time whereas a lot of the other tractors of that era wouldn't have had cladding maybe on the roof or down the pillars, whereas the SG2 cab did. So what happened was that the adhesive, between the cladding and the panels used to, break away or whatever, and the cladding they just start falling off. Now that's after about 20 years, and depending again on how they were treated and if moisture got in and if there was somebody that was sitting and rubbing off them and pulling at them and whatnot. But it is quite, you can get the cladding kits now. They are available, but you do need a little bit of patience and time to get them back to looking the way they should. You can slap them on and make a dog's dinner of it. It is worth taking your time to prepare the surface and fit the cladding properly. So the alternative MC1 and CC2 cabs offered an economy alternative to the SG2 with two-door entry, an openable front screen, so the front window was openable, and lower overall height. Available from the off, the MC1 had mid-mounted gear levers and didn't have the luxury of dependent-style pedals, but the CC2, introduced in 1990-91, saw the gear levers repositioned to the right-hand side of the console. So that was the cheaper version cab with the gear levers on the right-hand side of the console, but they were pretty rare at that stage. So if overall height was a concern, or access to the SG2 is likely to cause you a problem, the 50 series tractor with an MC1 or a CC2 could be a viable alternative. Plus, if you're going to be in and out of the tractor a lot, negotiating the steps and dash panel every time you climb aboard the SG2 may prove tiresome. Look out for broken doors on the MC1 and CC2, as the edge of the glass is particularly vulnerable and the steel frame can be damaged too, as with the SG2 cab. So a lot of them now you will find rust, especially around the doors and around the wheel arches, and they do rot badly, as do all cabs on tractors that are that age. 35, 40 years of age, you are going to get rust, um, unless they're ones that have been particularly well looked after. Um, so underneath the cladding, around the door frames in particular used to wear, the hinges used to break, the locks, the frames would strain on them. Um, so once inside the boat cabs, the comfort level is good, but with better mechanical ventilation, the SG2 cabs makes for, better bet in hot weather, and they were available too with air conditioning. Think about what you'll be doing with the tractor, as visibility is very different according to which cab is fitted. If you can find an example of both to ascertain which would be the best for you. The height of the SG2 cab gives a commanding position, but all-round vision is quite different from that in the MC1 and the CC2. Criticisms of the SG2, aside from entry and exit, include the hand-operated differential lock fitted to the later 1990-1991 onwards, and the lack of storage space for lunchbox tools and the like. As I said in the beginning, the SG2 cab is quite um, a little bit claustrophobic. It's small, there's no room behind the seat, there's very little room to the side of the seat, and there's nothing really on the floor. There's very, very little space, free space inside them. For if you were carrying a toolbox, you generally just slide it inside the door, or your lunch bag, it'll be on the floor or something. Uh, that's one place that they did suffer was space. Later ones, they come with a box mounted on the left hand side. It was up on the mudguard. It was dubbed a buddy seat or a passenger seat, but you'd want to be very small to sit up on that as a seat. But it did have space underneath to put some stuff into. Um, so the SG2 cab, although being quite small, is regarded as a great place to work. The cab steps can be a bit of a challenge, although the wide step on the later six-cylinder models was better. Good condition. SG2 cabs are in very, very high demand. Unfortunately, the man-Farag seats supply most of the tractors now being dismantled often have rusty cabs. Finding good used cab doors and seats is a particular problem. There is a range of aftermarket cab glass, mudguards, and interior cab cladding available. So the final thoughts then. Okay, so the John Deere 50 series, so it's renowned for its simplicity and reliability. The principle of evolution based on this design. It's built on the success of the 40 series and in recent years has become one of the most popular ranges of classic tractors, coveted by die-hard John Deere fans and general enthusiasts alike. No tractor is perfect, and although the SG2 cab has always been a love it or hate it type cab, there's a lot to be said for its levels of comfort. If you can't get over the aesthetics and ergonomics of the unit, then perhaps a 50 series is not for you. The MC1 and CC2 cab tractors can be hard to find, but is more likely to suit your needs. It's definitely worth persevering with a hunt to try and find one. The prices, of course, remain strong, and particularly for the 26, the 28, 30, 33, and 36, 50 models, but you may be able to find the 3-cylinder model at a reasonable price. So they're holding the price and they're going up. It's getting harder and harder to find good condition, off farm condition, I suppose, 50 series without problems, rusted cabs, or issues with the hydraulics. Now, that's okay for me because it doesn't particularly cost me a whole lot to repair them. But somebody, if they were looking to buy one um, as a hobby tractor, you really do have to be careful with what you're buying, especially uh, with ones with hydraulic problems, because I have seen lads caught out that paid big money, 15 grand plus for tractors, and a month or two later, when they might go to do something with it, realize that there is an issue with the hydraulics, that the transmission pump is gone, or the PTO pack or the high-low pack is gone. And it can be a money pit at that stage because parts are not cheap. Uh, they're definitely not cheap, and labor is not cheap either. So anyone that is looking for one, and indeed, especially in Ireland, if you're looking for one and you need anyone to, look over one, if you that's what I do. If you want me to look over one, if anyone has any, issues, if they're not sure, if they want to send me on some details, please. All my details are on this YouTube channel. Don't be afraid to contact me to look for a little bit of advice. But yeah, so look, at prices are strong. Yeah, as time goes on, the popularity of these tractors is sure to increase. With new tractors heavily reliant on electronics, the simplicity of the 50 series is likely to become more appealing to those who want to undertake their own maintenance and repairs. 50 series tractors are now seen as usable classics and therefore prices have risen accordingly. However, owners and prospective purchasers should remember that these tractors are 30 years plus old. Most, but not all parts are still available, but because of the age of the tractors, as I said, some will be expensive. So my ideal life, my ideal job, my ideal business would be to buy and sell 50 series and 40 series John Deere tractors, overhaul them and sell them. If I could work on them all day long and do nothing else, I would be quite happy. Sell them and work them. So I grew up working them. I grew up working on them. And I do have a lot of good memories, brilliant memories from my childhood with my dad driving all around the country as he worked for Mead Farm Machinery, collecting machines, driving to the port in Wexford from Navan in a 2650 um, on a day trip to collect a potato harvester and drive it back up, driving down, to Tipperary, down to Templeton Farm Machinery, maybe to collect a machine or something in a tractor before the day of the Arctic truck was used to transport machinery everywhere. Once the 40 kilometer an hour box came out, yeah, I had brilliant memories of them. The only regret that I have is that I don't have any much more pictures of the ones that I drove when I was younger, the ones that I grew up on, the 2650 in particular. In this picture, this is the one that I would have learned to drive on, and that I would have spent most of my time in. And it was a high lift, 40 kilometer, top of the range, 50 series, 2650. And that was a very, very famous tractor because it was used by Mead Farm Machinery to demo the particular Amazon sower and tiller one pass system that's in that picture there. And it was used around Leinster a lot to demo this outfit for farmhand. My dad used to drive it, and he was in the Farmer's Journal with it, and yeah, it was great times. When you think of an 80 odd horsepower tractor, and maybe this one was tinkered with a little bit, maybe it was a little bit higher than it was supposed to be, but it was driving 3 meter sower. All right, a little bit slower than 200 horsepower tractor, but it got the work done. It probably sold somewhere in the region of 600 and 700 acres a year, which is a lot for a little tractor like that. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Please, if you have any comments, if you have any history with the 50 series or indeed the 40 series, because they are basically the same tractors, if you have any history, let me know. And if you've gotten to the end, fair play. It's a long enough video. Thanks a million for watching. Thanks a million for subscribing, liking, and supporting the channel. And I will see everybody next week.